The hidden lives of medieval servants. The forgotten workers of the medieval world. Imagine dawn breaking over a medieval English castle, the grey light creeping into chilly stone halls as a handful of bleary-eyed figures stoke kitchen fires and scatter fresh rushes on the floor. These figures are the household servants, the invisible yet essential workforce that kept noble estates running daily. From pre-dawn until long after dusk, servants toiled behind the scenes, tending to every domestic need of lords and ladies. Chronicles and romances of the Middle Ages celebrated knights and nobles, but rarely mention the maids who scrubbed flagstones or the grooms who fed war horses. Historical documentation about servants is indeed sparse. They left few records of their own, and often appear only as nameless entries in account books or brief notes in letters. Yet, by piecing together household records, court rolls, personal letters, and even literature, modern historians can reconstruct their lives and recognize their significance. For example, the 15th-century letters of the Peasants family preserve snippets of servants' voices. Margaret Peasants dutifully recorded the transient words of her household and estate servants in correspondence to her husband. Such fragments remind us that servants, though largely forgotten by history, were very much present and vital in their own time. Medieval servants truly were the forgotten workers of the medieval world. They served in the shadows of great halls and manor kitchens, seldom noted by name, yet their work made possible the splendid lifestyle of the nobility. Reconstructing their daily existence is an exercise in detective work, combing through royal household ordinances, aristocratic account books, and scattered remarks in chronicles for clues. It is a necessary task, for without these invisible servants, the castles of medieval England could not function. In this overview, we will shine a light on the hidden lives of these men and women, their roles and responsibilities, their daily routines, their place in the social hierarchy, and the challenges and occasional opportunities they faced. In doing so, we give overdue recognition to the servants' indispensable contributions in sustaining noble life, even as we acknowledge the scant evidence that survives of their personal stories. The roles and responsibilities of servants. Medieval noble households were complex operations, and servants filled a wide spectrum of specialized roles. Broadly, their duties fell into three categories: household servants, kitchen staff, and estate workers. Each group required different skills, and each servant, from the highest steward to the lowliest scullion, had a defined place in the lord's domestic machinery. Household servants. These were the attendants responsible for the lord's residence and personal needs. At the top stood officers like the steward, or seneschal, and chamberlain, often of gentle birth and entrusted with great responsibility. The steward acted as the estate manager and chief administrator, overseeing finances, legal affairs, and the coordination of all other staff. A medieval guide to stewardship, seneschalcy, advised that the seneschal of lands ought to be prudent and faithful, and he ought to know the law of the realm, to protect his lord's business and to instruct the bailiffs who are beneath him. The chamberlain, meanwhile, managed the lord's private chambers and wardrobe. He looked after the lord's clothing and even kept track of livery uniforms issued to other servants. For the lady of the household, there might be a lady's maid or gentle-born companion performing equivalent duties, dressing the lady, tending to her chamber, and managing her jewels and linens. Lower-ranking household servants included the laundress, who washed clothing and linens in large tubs of heated water mixed with lye soap, and the chambermaids who swept and tidied rooms, laid fresh rushes on floors, made up beds, emptied chamber pots, and kept the fires lit in the chambers. Young boys of good family might serve as pages. At around 7 years old, a page would be sent to a lord's household to run errands, carry messages, and wait upon the lord at meals. Pages were not paid wages. Instead, their payment was the training in manners and management they received as they observed and assisted the lord, a first step on the path to knighthood for those of noble blood. It's important to note that despite later romantic images of castles teeming with maidservants, most household servants in medieval England were male. Surviving household ordinances show far more men employed than women. Women usually served in gender-specific roles like laundry or as ladies' attendants, and sometimes the wives of male servants worked unofficially alongside their husbands. Kitchen staff. The castle's kitchens were a world unto themselves, staffed by a brigade of servants to prepare the vast quantities of food required by a noble household. At the head of the kitchen was the cook or master chef, responsible for planning menus and overseeing meal preparation. In a great lord's household, the cook supervised a team of undercooks and specialists. There were servants dedicated to butchering meats, baking bread, brewing ale, and making confections. Larger establishments even had niche experts, a sauce maker, a pastry chef, a waferer to bake light wafers for desserts, and so on. Supporting them were countless helpers. Scullions scrubbed pots and pans, spit boys, often small boys, sat by the hearth roasting meat on the spit, and general kitchen boys fetched water and fuel. Two particularly important offices were the butler, who managed the wine and beer in the buttery, and the pantler, who oversaw the pantry with its stores of bread. These officers ensured that drink and bread, staples of every meal, never ran out. Contemporary account books give us an idea of the scale of these operations. For instance, the Royal Constitutio Domus Regis, Household Ordinance of 1136 lists dozens of kitchen servants, from master cooks down to bakers, along with their daily allowances of food and drink. Preparing daily meals for a castle meant coordinating bakers to churn out bread, brewers to make ale, and poultry keepers to supply chickens and eggs. It was the cook's duty to manage all this activity. One medieval cookbook, the Viandir of Tailvant, contains elaborate recipes used by such cooks, including rich meat pies and spice stews, hinting at the expertise these kitchen staff needed to satisfy their lord's palate. In sum, the kitchen servants formed the engine room of the household, turning raw farm produce into hearty meals for dozens or even hundreds of people each day. Estate workers. Beyond the mansion or castle walls, a noble's estate required its own cadre of servants and workers. These individuals might not serve inside the lord's home, but they were part of the extended household in a broad sense, keeping the lord's lands productive. The chief among estate staff was often the bailiff or estate steward, who managed the manor farms, collected rents from tenant farmers, and oversaw agricultural work. Under him toiled ploughmen, oxherds, cowherds, swineherds, and shepherds, who tended the flocks of sheep that could be a major source of manorial income, providing wool, the medieval gold. A later medieval estate management manual by Walter of Henley advised landowners on selecting honest and competent bailiffs and keeping close watch on daily outputs of the domain farm, implying that estate servants had to be both hard-working and trustworthy under distant supervision. On the estate's lands, gardeners and orchard keepers cultivated vegetables, herbs, and fruit for the household's tables. For a large castle, there might be a park keeper or gamekeeper maintaining deer parks for hunting. And of course, there were the stable hands and grooms who cared for the lord's horses. Horses were essential for medieval life, for war, travel, hunting, and transport, so grooms occupied an important niche. They mucked out stalls, brushed and fed the horses, and prepared them for riding or for pulling carts. The castle's marshal oversaw all horse-related operations, and often supervised military readiness as well, with grooms and blacksmiths under him to shoe horses and repair wagons. We even hear of specialized roles like the falconer, trained in handling the lord's hunting hawks, and watchmen or porters who guarded the castle gates. In aristocratic households like that of the Berkeley family or the peasants, surviving account books note payments to such workers, entries for wages of ploughmen, purchases of fodder by the head groom, or liveries, uniforms, issued to gardeners give us a paper trail of these servants' existence. While these estate workers toiled outdoors rather than in the Great Hall, they were as critical to the lord's comfort as any indoor servant. Their work meant that the household was fed, the grounds kept orderly, and the lord's wealth, tied up in crops and livestock, was maintained. It's clear that nearly every facet of life in a noble household corresponded to a servant's job. From personal attendants who dressed the lord in the morning, to kitchen hands who cooked his supper, to plowmen who harvested the grain for his bread, a chain of labor supported the lofty lifestyle of the medieval nobility. As one historian aptly put it, a great household was like a microcosm of society, containing its own administrators, artisans, and workers within it. Each servant, high or humble, knew their duties and their place in this hierarchy.